Chris Reykdal is our new Superintendent of Public Instruction for the state of Washington. Chris was born and raised in Tacoma, Washington as the youngest of 8 children, big family. He has served as a high school history teacher, local school board member, state legislator, and budget and policy executive for our state's community and technical college system. Chris has dedicated his entire career to public education and is currently serving in his first term as the state superintendent of public instruction. Chris and his wife Kim live in historic Tumwater with their 2 children, Carter and Kennedy. Chris leads a team at OSPI working hard to open multiple pathways to high school graduation, including expanded technical education opportunities. Additionally, OSPI has transformed the state's accountability system through critical policy and budget changes. We encourage you to see his full bio on the conference website in the app. And without further ado, I'd like to have Chris come up to the stage and give what you will find is a very compelling story.
Great. Thank you, sir. Very good to see you. Good to see you. Oh, good morning. You're still here. It's exciting. Happy Wednesday. You watched, The Voice last night. You're primed up for Thursday night football coming up. The Seattle area is getting an NHL team. It's like we are on the cusp of glory in the Puget Sound. And that's the good news. The other great news about our region right now is the obvious economic expansion that's going on. I spend the better part of my time as your state superintendent not thinking about tomorrow or even the next legislative session. God knows it's going to be brutal and challenging and all that. But 20 years from now, do we sustain this thing? Is there an equal opportunity for everybody to participate in a growing economy? What industries will transform that we haven't even thought of today? What's going to go away that we would cling to, but quite frankly can't keep due to big economic global pressures? I am your state superintendent of public schools, so I am elected statewide. And I lead off with that often because you need to know that I am totally unencumbered. My success or failure is actually in your hands. I'm not appointed by a board. I'm not appointed by a governor. I am directly elected. I'm one of only 13 superintendents in the country with that great opportunity. 9 of which, by the way, are partisan and only 4 are nonpartisan. I actually run in a nonpartisan role here. So when I think about where we're going, there's a lot of big questions I have in your world of thinking about career development in the workforce and apprenticeship specifically and pre-apprenticeship. And we have big concepts at OSPI and the state education system about how that might be transformed over time. But I'm always grounded in the truth of why. Why are we doing this? We're doing this because your state superintendent is embarking upon a $200,000 home remodel right now. That seems like a lot of damn money, man. It feels like it, too. Part of it's an addition, part of it's gutting a 40-year-old house, kind of making it all new again. On the front end of that process was a baccalaureate degree holding engineer with a $1,500 bill for my plans on the remodel that had to get approved by the city. $1,500. Every step thereafter is an $8,000 apprenticeship functioning plumbing system, a $15,000 apprenticeable, even if it isn't happening, roofing system, a $12,000 apprenticeable electrical system in that house, a $14,000 drywall sheetrock, concrete finishers, connections to a new septic line that's going to go out. About $160,000 or $170,000 of my project are men and women who have unbelievable skills, getting market rate wages with more than a high school diploma, but less than a baccalaureate degree. The American economy is built on the concept of training with skills, not necessarily the concept that you're only valid or valuable if you have a traditional academic model. But let me be clear, we need baccalaureate degrees and graduate degrees and PhDs. The engineered parts of that new PEX line, imagine all of the engineering and the science that went into that. Where's the bulk of the money spent? Installation, technical skills. I'm not worried about the chemistry of a PEX line running through my house. I'm worried about the damn thing ever leaking if we get frozen weather like we have right now. I'm worried that the people who have given their lives in this room are training young men and women to create great products and services for us across our state and across the country. The old mantra of 127, many of you in education know about this. Despite the rhetoric of global economies taking over and we all need to be computer scientists, nothing's changed. 1 executive, 2 managers, 7 producers. It was true basically in the ag economy. It is true in the software economy. It is true in all kinds of industries. But we got ourselves on the wrong foot for a while. We got ourselves convinced that most of that production would go somewhere else, that globalization would send lots of work to places with cheaper labor, and certainly some of that has been the case. But just because you produce component parts at a lower cost, the install, the replacement, the repair, the technical support that goes into having it shipped to this country and built or installed or replaced. We are still a 127 nation. We need an executive for every 2 managers in the middle, and we need 7 producers. 70% of this economy is still all about men and women with real skills producing. And my God, we better think about it differently. The original baccalaureate degree, apprenticeship, is still the most valuable degree in the economy relative to debt. So we got all kinds of people trying to get baccalaureate degrees, most of whom because mom and dad said, that's the future, everyone gets baccalaureate degrees, get to college, drink beer for 4 years, get a degree, go be successful. The beer part's very successful across college campuses, incidentally, and other substances, I'm told. It's a very interesting time in our country for what we're legalizing. But we've also created $1.5 trillion, that's with a T, not a B, not an M. $1.5 trillion in student loan debt under the auspices that every single person needs to rack up debt, get an academic degree, and then life will be amazing when they graduate. Home ownership rates amongst this generation are down. Overall purchasing is down. They're delaying families because they are in such debt. Their overall share as a demographic, 20 to 35-year-olds, their overall share of total economic activity in this country is at the lowest level it's ever been. Now, they argue a bunch of you baby boomers need to retire. They're like, get out of the way. And make sure you pass all your wealth on to us, by the way. I'm in the middle, by the way. I take no pledge. I'm not a millennial or a Z, and I'm not a baby boomer. I'm one of those sad little Gen Xers in the middle, just working hard. We're tiny, by the way. There are 70 million baby boomers. There's about 70 million millennials. There's only about 35 million Gen Xers. So our parents were 60s and 70s hippies, and they did everything. And I'm not having kids. And half of them didn't, it turns out. But what a time, $1.5 trillion in debt under the guise that we need something that it turns out the economy doesn't actually need that much of. We do need baccalaureate degrees and graduate degrees, but it turns out only about 35% of our economy demands those degrees. About 65 or 70% of our economy demands more than a high school diploma, less than a baccalaureate degree, post-secondary training. And things that my brothers and sisters in the Labor Council have been fighting for forever are starting to sort of be reimagined and exploding once again. We knew about the power of apprenticeship in traditional trades. We didn't imagine 40 years ago it would be so necessary in healthcare, information technology systems. I'm telling you right now, I have an apprenticeship problem in education. I've got $1.5 trillion in student loan debt flying out there, young people trying to figure out their options, and they're going, teaching? Really? $50,000, $60,000 in student loan debt, and then we say to them, oh, by the way, there's a student teaching opportunity for a semester. You get to pay $10,000 in tuition, absolutely make no money, and give work to your employer. Well, shit, sign me up. This sounds amazing. How can I work really hard, rack up debt, and not get paid? God, this sounds like an amazing opportunity. So I have an apprenticeship problem. What I actually need are young people who want to be in the profession, who actually have an apprenticeship opportunity. A full year of student teaching is actually best based on the literature, and it would be unbelievable if that was a paid experience because you are giving your labor to the profession. You are learning under a master teacher. It is exactly the model that many of you have built in your industries, but in education we go, just rack up more debt during that semester of student teaching. Trust us, it'll be amazing when you make $40,000 the next year. Now, honestly, we are making progress. We're getting our teacher salaries up to market rate, thankfully, after lots of very difficult and meaningful collective bargaining over the last 2 years. But this is your moment. This is your moment to go beyond traditional trades, though we need more of that. This is your moment to capture industries we haven't thought about. And what I'll make sure I leave you with unequivocally is this is your moment to talk to young people, to talk to women in a different way, and to talk to people of color in a different way. If there's one thing we know from the research is that our industries of traditional apprenticeship have not always been accommodating places for young people, people of color, and women in particular. And I could throw in our students with disabilities and certainly our military veterans, but there's been enormous progress amongst the trades and traditional apprenticeship programs and recruiting vets. And we're working hard at trying to be more inclusive. But I will tell you, your labor market is now majority female. Your labor market is now 60 to 65% somebody other than a white male. Your students with disabilities are 14 or 15% of all your high school graduates. And by the way, when we do all of that looking at these students and sort of how they got this determination of disability and what accommodation they need, there's such a misperception in our society. We think that 1 of every 6 or 1 of every 7 of our children is in this isolated schoolroom with profound developmental or cognitive disabilities. No, the vast bulk of them are at or above their peers in cognitive performance, but they need an accommodation. They've got dyslexia, or they've got some sort of smaller accommodation that they need. Absolutely capable of the greatest things in the world, but we've kind of got a broken system, and I'm trying to get our system to take greater responsibility for that. But it means those of you who are developing apprentices and thinking about pathways for young people, you have to be thinking about accommodation. You can still build an unbelievable 40-story high-rise building in Seattle and be dyslexic with the right supports and the right skills and the right understanding of what's needed. So I challenge you to do that. I challenge you to think about what inclusive recruiting practices look like. And as hard as it might be, I challenge you to think about what it would be like to have a 16 or a 17-year-old in a pre-apprenticeship program, connecting their traditional high school experience or their skill center or their tech center experience to actual work as a young person. And this is where the heart palpitations start. Oh my God, it's harder to deal with a 17-year-old training than just have them wait till they're 25 or 30, get some life experience under their belt. They'll see some things as obvious, and then when they come to us, we're ready to go. We can't wait. We are in big trouble under the old model of I didn't know what I was doing in high school. Maybe I dropped out. Maybe I stuck around. Then I explored the world for a while. I racked up a bunch of debt. Maybe I had a family. Maybe things didn't quite work out. I'm going to go to the trades as a second-tier opportunity. That day has to end. We need young people beginning in 5th grade and 6th grade and 7th grade and 8th grade thinking about their career pathway, saying my primary pathway, my pathway of first choice is I want to build, I want to construct, I want to manufacture, I want to work in agriculture, I want to be in healthcare, I want to be an educator. We can't think about career and tech ed and career-connected learning as a second-tier system, as a default system when academic pathways don't work for kids. Because it's a big frickin' lie. We are telling 70% of our students, try this thing that only 30% of the jobs in the country need, and if you can't get in there, or because the higher ed slots are limited, well, I'm sorry, you didn't make it. You didn't get over that standardized test. So we're going to need you to go over to this pathway. We make perception that they are a second-class citizen when the economy actually needs them to pick these apprenticeshipable crafts and trades and pathways as their primary choice, and they want to. So I've got some responsibility, and I need your help. I need you pounding on policymakers to say it doesn't have to be Algebra 2 pre-calc for every kid. Now that you have a 3rd math credit, how about applied mathematics? How about industry-recognized credentials in sciences? There is ag history that the ag community needs as social studies. There is technical writing that lots of your industries need so that students can see graphically and they can see in written form to create concept, whether it's in fabrication, whether it's in masonry, you name it. Technical writing and technical understanding and technical reading are powerful. What have we rewarded with standardized tests for 20 years? Academic reading. Vocabulary that prepares you to get to a university and avoid pre-college coursework. Very important for students who are on that pathway. High standards for them. But can you imagine telling everybody that the knothole is this big and 70% of you are going to fail it and in your 30s figure out something else after you've racked up a bunch of debt? This country has to change rapidly. So we're going to approach the legislature this year to say your third credit of math should be a lot more flexible. Your 24 credit diploma, thank you, that's very good. Your 24 credit diploma that's driving every kid to a university pathway has to flex up. Has to flex up. Not only should the content of the coursework be more flexible to address the pathways into industry, but the actual total number of credits has to be more flexible. If those of you out there need students in the construction trades, let's call it a skill center course in construction, you need them to truly understand applied geometry. You cannot build anything in this country if you don't have applied geometry. Applied, knowing how to take those concepts and put them on a job. That's the coursework you need. What do we do with a student who struggles in any geometry algebra 1 class? We remediate them in a traditional academic class. We burn up their elective credits, mostly CTE opportunities, and we stick them in coursework to prepare them for algebra 2 and pre-calculus. So we need to be able to say to the legislature, don't make it a 24 credit diploma where a student has to be perfect all the way through. Make it a 21 or 22 credit diploma. Every student shooting for the best. But if I struggle in something that's academic and I make a different choice, you shouldn't deny me a high school diploma. I made a choice to get to an industry that needs me at a time that I need it and lower my debt. So we have a ton of policymakers who get this, but there's these traditional fights. And there's honest to God history we are dragging with us. Because let's be honest, those of us in education 50 years ago, wasn't me, I'm only 20 right now, so. But we were tracking kids. We were letting adults make decisions about who had access to those baccalaureate degrees and those programs and who was going to be stuck in an alternative track. We were using adult logic to make determinations, maybe using assessments. And we were sticking students at the time in some pathways that were dead end, because today the world is different. This center of excellence and its peer group in the community and technical college system is leading the country in making sure that nothing that is achieved in this system is terminal. Everything leads to something else. The next certificate, the next stackable credential, the baccalaureate degree, the applied baccalaureate degree, everything leads to something else. And that wasn't always the system. So we have a lot of parents out there, particularly parents of kids of color, who say, I'm down with this flexible high school diploma, and I love the applied concept, Chris, and I want my student to be able to have pathways. But I want my kid to choose that, because if they instead want to go to the purple and gold or the crimson and the gray or be Wildcats or Vikings or Gooey Ducks or whatever, I want that also. I don't want the adults to decide what pathway my kid has. I want my kid to decide it. And the compromise we have to have in society is, yes, your child should be doing that. But I'm failing you if I don't show your child the great pathways earlier so that their default plan isn't necessarily a baccalaureate degree. And my job is to show them that if it is a baccalaureate degree, they can get there and they are not in a different pathway. My job is to open up doors for kids now and help parents understand that doors are wide open. But it does mean that our systems of adults have to be more accommodating. We have to think about race differently and the systemic bias that's in our systems, from apprenticeship programs to the trades, to education, to higher education. We have to think about what it means to support kids towards their dreams. So we're going to pound on the legislature on credits. We're going to flex up the credits. We think more things should matter. We're going to continue to do what we call equivalencies or cross-crediting. We've built sufficient math in some courses that a student gets a CTE credit and they get a math credit at the same time. And as we do more of that, you're going to see students say, gosh, my high school diploma only requires one CTE credit. But I want to show students that they can take 6 or 7 or 8 of their credits, a third of their time, or their entire junior and senior year practically, very focused on a trade. And they're going to get the math and the science and the English language arts. That's the system that we have right at our fingertips. And we're building it. Here's the last challenge I have for you. You've got to be accommodating for these young people. As you develop more women and more people of color, more students with disabilities, and just younger people in general who say, I get it, I've caught on, I see the light, like the world's changing, there's an opportunity for me. Can they really come to your industry at 18 and get a meaningful job and build and develop? Is it really a competitive place for them? Is it accommodating for them? Are you flexible for moms who have children? Everything about the industries that we work in has to think about the same flexibility I'm offering in education. Because this generation coming, in case you don't have teenagers, I have a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old, holy hell. Everything I thought I knew about structured work is gone. Brilliant, innovative, ubiquitous knowledge. They don't even ask me questions anymore. They just give me the look like, okay, I see you're going to go to Google and find this out. In my dad's speech, it's dead. Like, they'll occasionally check in, but mostly they find their own knowledge and information, and then they're testing it, right? Then they're testing it with examples, or they're asking. Their concept of learning is a much more self-empowered learning, and with that, they come with expectations of flexibility. They expect to be pretty mobile. They expect to have opportunities. One of the hardest things we have to show them is that we expect hard work. One of the toughest challenges I have with my own kids, and I see in others, is that the concept of pathways and opening up doors is not a substitution for hard work. You still have to put in the time. You still have to work hard. It's still a competitive environment. We still have 300 million Americans who want to be successful, and you will compete for jobs. And the better the job, the more competition there'll be. So we're teaching resiliency in school, and we're bringing these concepts on board. But it's an interesting world we live in. It's an interesting world. These young people have grown up with the idea that knowledge is power and knowledge is in a device. So we got to teach them what it's like to be in a craft where you try and it doesn't work. We're teaching them the resiliency of testing and failing, not as failure, but as a way to learn how to do it right. But we got to do this in very safe places. We can't have them on the job site figuring that out unless it's in a structured way. So increasingly, what I think you'll see over the next 5, 10, and 20 years is that high schools will not deliver everything you want them to deliver. You will. And this is the part that's scaring my traditional institutions when I say to them, more and more of our state dollars will follow students to the training centers that are not necessarily traditional public schools, and they'll get their training in those places. You will give them high school or college credit for it, but the experts in industry are sitting in industry mostly. And that is really tough for some people to accept, because we have a Western tradition where all knowledge happens in 30 seats in a classroom facing straight ahead. And somebody with lots of knowledge talks to them for 12 weeks. And then after 12 weeks, they know a little bit more. And then they go to summer and they forget it. And then they come back, and for 12 weeks, they sit in seats. And they learn a little bit more. And then they go on holiday break and they lose 20% of it. And then they come back in the spring for 12 more weeks and they learn more. Our academic traditions are driving our concept of learning, when in fact those of you in this room have had this concept for hundreds of years, going back well before our nation's founding, that the greatest learning comes from parents and being on the job. And that is really hard for my system to understand that. So we're challenging all of that. We're challenging ways to do this. The governor's interest in career-connected learning is the entire concept of more of their hours as young people spent in the workforce, getting that academic credit, but also learning the industries. And we'll figure it out together. It'll come in the form of pre-apprenticeship models, and it'll come in the form of apprentices getting there earlier, and it'll come in the form of our career and tech centers and our comprehensive high schools bringing back more skills. It will come in all of those forms, but we got to be open to it. Okay, so here's how I'm going to close this up here. In all of this work, there is this idea that every student can achieve. Every single student can achieve. Because why else would we be in this if it isn't an intergenerational commitment we make to the success of our country and our state? And so to all of you in this audience who have made success of your lives, some of you through paths that none of us could imagine, I want you to presume that it's harder and we have to take greater responsibility in the next generation. We have growing income inequality, and we've made strides in places, but the next generation of Americans that want these opportunities won't look like they did 50 or 100 years ago. We have to really think differently about what our industries look like and what opportunity looks like. And it means taking a risk sometimes. With mental health the way it is, with opioid addiction the way it is, with our need to understand that these are not lifetime sentences when you're in addiction or your family is or you've struggled academically. These are moments in time. And that means we got to think more about rehabilitation and work as an opportunity for salvation instead of denying it to them as a punishment, if that makes sense. I have a growing number of my young people in juvenile justice centers for things that they need to take responsibility for, but in all probability, they probably never were going to avoid given the circumstances of their birth. They deserve opportunity. They deserve industries and professions that say, we see you, and you got to do your time, or you've got to do your program or your plan, but for God's sakes, the answer is in work and contribution, and there is no damn greater honor in the world than producing something. Producing something. And as a kid who grew up the youngest of 8 on public assistance, I can tell you even our little 16-foot wide aluminum trailer I lived in for 2 years was home. And as much as there was alcoholism and dysfunction, when my dad would remodel or build something or teach me a skill, and by the way, that remodel I talked about a third of that I'm doing myself in my own home because of the skills my father taught me. There is pride in production. There is pride in work. And the quickest way to make sure that everyone feels inclusive is that they get a pathway to produce something. Not just think about it, which is important, but to touch it and produce it. My whole family are builders, and I've said to them forever, most of them don't even have a baccalaureate degree. Some of them do, most don't. I said there's no greater joy in the world than handing people a set of keys to their home. The memories they create, the family they create, just the richness of coming home from their work to a space that is theirs. When we produce, when we install, when we manufacture and fix, we're not just doing a job. We're building a country, we're building a state, we're building a community, and we're building up individuals when we connect them to that. It is not learning just for the sake of learning, it's for service. And all of our jobs are about serving people, products and services that make their lives better. That is my vision for our state. We are actually making it happen. You all are going to help us make it happen. You're going to look in the mirror at ways to break down barriers for students with disabilities, communities of color, women, young people. You're going to think differently about the risk you would take taking a young person, God forbid. A 16-year-old who knows everything about Fortnite but can't turn a wrench is a scary darn thing. I get it. But she does evolve, he does evolve. They do get there when we help them. So take risk, take risk, take risk. Pound on your legislators to flex up these graduation requirements for pathways for kids. Honor all pathways. And if you're so inclined and have the ability, help these young people with their debt. You'd be surprised how many baccalaureate degree holders with debt come back to the 2-year college system or back to an apprenticeship program because now they actually need to work. It's a tremendous market opportunity for us to capture talent to say, hey, there's the wage, but also maybe there's this other thing I can do for you. Take risk. Our state counts on it, we are dependent on it, and our future rests in your ability to replicate yourselves, replace the workforce, and to do it in a way that is substantially more inclusive than we've been in the past. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
We may have a couple of minutes. You wanted to take some questions?
Sure, you bet.
88,000 para para-educators, most of whom do not move forward to become teachers, but it would be great if they had a better pathway. And since it's in your environment, I wondered what your thoughts might be about what kind of support is necessary and recognizing that apprenticeship could be a wonderful key to make that happen.
Awesome. You didn't hear the beginning of your question, but paraeducators. I gave you my personal dilemma on why I need really what is an expanded apprenticeship program. One of the greatest opportunities we have in education is to develop these folks who are assistants in the classroom or what we consider classified school employees. Many of them have exposure to teaching and learning or other elements of the work. They want that next step. They didn't want or couldn't take the opportunity of a traditional teacher prep baccalaureate program, so we have folks building those pathways for them. We have a professional educator standards board who sets up those standards. There's now some mandatory training. No disrespect to my friends in the legislature, I served there for 6 years. They might have set up another training obligation on the backs of the employee that doesn't come with a financial incentive at the end. Deep breath. They did this to teachers too, called ProCert, and it got wiped out. So we gotta fix that. But the other great opportunity here when we do this well is we are much more likely to have an educator workforce that is diverse if we have pathways from our paraeducators. We are much more likely to have a diverse workforce if we accept more of our out-of-state educators. We make it very hard for people from another state to come in here. So we're all about this. We think there's a pathway here. We also make appointments to the para board. It is a standalone board. I just don't think we can go fast enough to figure these things out. Our school districts are desperate. They need it. But again, there's got to be a financial incentive or the state commitment to that. Because asking people who make 11, 10, 12 bucks an hour, hopefully more in the future, to then fund the cost of their education is exactly why they're not already in a position to do it. So the state has to take greater responsibility for that training. And I don't mean through loans, I mean like we actually pay for it. Yeah, very good stuff. Other questions? You want to know who's going to win the Monday Night Football game between the Vikings and the Seahawks? It's the Seahawks by 16 points. Bank it. Take it to Vegas.
I'm not quite articulate, but we have seniors under the 24 credit, and I just wondered if you have a Hail Mary for them so that they can graduate and move on to these awesome programs. Otherwise, they're going to be spinning their wheels trying to make up credit, and we'll put them further behind. So I'm praying for a Hail Mary.
I've arrived. My first name Hale, my last name Mary, my middle name whatever. So we agree. We have seniors in high school today who are going to be subject to this 24 credit diploma this spring and still technically subject to standardized tests as a requirement for graduating. We have had a waiver over the last couple years where my office can receive a request from a student that says, okay, I didn't pass the standardized test in the form you wanted, but then I went on to this pathway, or I got college credit, or I've been admitted, or I'm in an apprenticeship program, or I'm actually in the military or been accepted. Like, we've opened up these pathways. I have the waiver. We've graduated, I think, something like 3,000 seniors who otherwise would have been denied diplomas without these pathways, but it's coming in the form of a waiver. And it ended last year. So I need the legislature this session to codify those pathways, give me a waiver for a few more years, so that'll address this issue of assessment. And then this session, if they will flex up that 24 credit diploma, it will kick in time for this year's seniors to graduate this spring. We are in a moment, folks. When you make every student be proficient on a university level math pathway, and only 58 or 59% of your students are meeting that university admissions pathway as 8th graders in math, we've got some math work to do, but come on. 30% of our students will direct enroll to a university. 60% of them are on the path to do it, but we would deny high school diplomas to 40% of them who will never want to attend a university, don't need academic math, but they're ready to rock and roll in industry. So that's this work. Literally January to April this year, if they don't make those two determinations, for the first time in about 30 years, you're going to see our high school grad rate drop, even though our students are taking more math, more science, more English language arts. That's how ridiculous the policy is. 2 more questions back here. Yep.
Chris, over here, on your right.
Is that you, God? Oh,
Yes.
Thank you, Jesus. I thought you were coming back. That thing I did in 12th grade, or 12 years old at 6th grade, that wasn't the real me. Yeah, go ahead.
I know you're working on this and it's one of your priorities, but maybe you can talk to us a little bit about where the counselors and advisors will come from that are going to talk about opportunities in trades and other options for the current students that are attending the schools.
Yeah, awesome question. Part of that obligation within our system, if we're going to have expectations for students to have pathways, is they got to know about them. And we have to intervene earlier and do career exploration earlier. Well, we have a nice policy we put in place called the High School and Beyond Plan. We ask every student to start thinking about this by middle school, and we can debate whether that should be earlier. But like so many things, the requirement to build the plans is in place. The additional counselors, both mental health and guidance counselors, were not put in place. So we have a budget request this year to add to the prototypical model, the basic education formulas, a significant investment in middle school counselors, and then ultimately elementary, and then continue to add in high school. We have to have professionals in the buildings that help coordinate this, even if it's about creating a connection to industry and that handoff. Our frontline counselors are everything, and we've really starved them in this state. We have about an 800-to-1 ratio in elementary school for counselors. The national expectation is 250-to-1. We're like 500 or 600-to-1 in middle school. We're not even halfway to the goal in middle school. And by high school, we get closer, something like 350-to-1. But we're not even there in high school, so that's part of it. The second part of your question is, where do we find these folks? Well, we now have a new starting salary in the state that's going to average in the high 40s to low 50s in education. Its average is going to be $85,000 next year. Now that's skewed to the top because the same baby boomer demographic you're experiencing is happening in schools. But we've got this profession nearly at market, and I think we can attract young talent to school counseling, but they got to know the positions are there, the wages are there, and wouldn't it be awesome if their apprenticeship program wasn't something they paid for out of pocket? So that's part of the plan.
So I just have a question as far as, because there's more of an emphasis on the Career Connect learning with the Career and Technical Education Department at OSPI, is there going to be a legislative ask to give more state funded since that department is primarily federally funded?
Man, why'd you ask me that question? That hurt my feelings. The truthiness of that question, if I can quote a Comedy Central former individual, is we are desperate to have the state invest, not just in the students, right? Every legislator thinks money for kids, money for kids. You can't actually get there unless you have the adult systems connected. And the truth of that question is that the vast bulk of the team at OSPI is really funded through federal dollars, which tells you the historical, just pathetic emphasis in the states on career and tech ed and workforce development, right? It was a department the feds cared about, shove them over here. So for now, we'll depend on the federal money. We do have a budget request to add resources in some places for our CT program. I have been so bold as to offend everyone and say, why don't we have one agency in the state that does the federal program instead of every agency with a little federal money? Have one, load them up with federal money, not ours, by the way, and then have the state backfill that. Because I want stable employees even when the feds do what they do, like offer $1.5 trillion tax cuts, get into 3 wars, and then say we don't have enough money for education, sorry. So the answer is yes. There is some incremental movement towards that. We will really emphasize that. Mostly what the legislature will say is reprioritize what you have, Chris. You have some state-funded staff there. And I'll say to them, yeah, my appropriation is smaller today for my operation than it was a decade ago. And so that war goes on. But it sounds like you're volunteering to lobby for OSPI at no cost. So thank you very much. Welcome to the new apprenticeship model. Yeah. Very, very good. I can barely see you.
Over here, to your right. So I have a follow-up question to the previous one. We talk about having the need for more student counselors. My question, though, is, like when I go to job fairs, it's all about colleges, nothing about construction. There might be 50 colleges to 3 employers there. I asked the governor this question, that our counselors that are counseling our children on where their career paths are going to be went from high school to college back to being a counselor, and don't know what a carpenter does, what a mason does, what an electrician does. Is there any plans on adding to their course curriculum actually going out and working in the different trades. So when they do counsel the 75% of the students that don't go to college, what their other opportunities are, because they know what they are, not just that they read it in a book.
I really appreciate the question. My wife's a 20-year counselor, and I'm as candid with her and her association as I am with you here. I think it is a profound problem, and it's not an intentional problem by any means, but most of our counselors go through traditional academic settings, traditional university pathways. Few of them have worked in industry or trade. We think it's a profound enough problem that I'm talking with AGC, who's one of your sponsors, and some of their reps. I've talked to Sierra Pacific. I have this moments where I get to talk to business leaders, and I say one of the greatest things you can do is help figure out, and Boeing is now doing this out of their pocket. They are creating paid experiences for counselors to come onto their factory floor in the summer, spend a period of time, I think they're at a week or maybe 2 weeks. The teacher/counselor gets clock hours, which is part of the requirement for them to keep up their professional credentials, but they're doing it by seeing all of the job opportunities for young people and mid-career people in factory settings instead of on paper. And I cannot tell you how great that would be if we could keep expanding that. They will spend some money out of pocket for opportunities. They're going to training sessions and classes and getting college credits mostly out of their own pocket. It is going to really take off when industry says, we want you to see what we're doing here and what the opportunities are. So keep it up on your end. We'll keep it up on our end. I do feel confident that we're seeing the growth of our counselor corps say, we see it. We see opportunities for kids. They've actually seen that. Kids need something different for a long time, but the answer was get them in remedial classes and get them ready for college. But I think their eyes are opening up. I'd love to see them on your job sites more and more, including the math teacher, including the English language arts teacher. Get them on your job sites to see the real world application of the work. And you'll see them using lesson plans that are a lot more technical writing, a lot more graphic based, lots more applied math. Because it all counts, it all works towards their goal, especially if we de-emphasize standardized testing. So really, really powerful.
Chris, you spoke about the credit equivalency piece, and I know OSPI has a state-based credit equivalency for in-classroom educational models. So if you're doing an advanced manufacturing class, that class can also be worth your math, science, and English credit. Is there an opportunity to start looking at those credit equivalencies and state-approved credit equivalencies for these youth or these apprenticeship models? So then that way, instead of local districts reinventing the wheel, they can go back to the approved OSPI piece.
Thank you. Great question. We are at a point where I'm going to make some folks pretty uncomfortable here. And the nature of this question is we have these local relationships, local college, maybe local apprenticeship program, local high school. They have this equivalency. You take this class, you'll not only get your CT credit, you'll get math credit. If it's got some robust content, maybe even some college credit. The deal's local. The student wants to take that somewhere else, and the next institution says, well, we don't honor that deal. We weren't a part of that thing. We actually think statewide equivalencies are kind of the future, and it's really hard work. Because somebody in Cheney and somebody in Bellingham and Vancouver and Seattle and Walla Walla, you eventually have to put them in a room and say, trust us, we're building enough math competency in this course that when the student takes this and we give them math credit for it, you will accept that. And it's hard because you're pushing on a traditional, generally higher ed system where the faculty gets to decide course by course whether it's worthy of credit. And we're saying systems should help develop those courses and those credits, and then we should have statewide equivalencies that kind of dominate, and that is really going to be hard. But we're pushing that this year. We're asking the legislature to give us a little political muscle behind it because we think it's time to kick a little butt on traditional education institutions who get a little myopic about their thing. And no disrespect to anybody. I was a teacher. I get it. You're not doing something so unique that it isn't worth value somewhere else. And if you're really as good as you think you are, which I think you are, it should absolutely have value everywhere else. And so that's part of that challenge. Very good.
I have a question here.
Oh, you're
I've
waving in.
emailed you. I'm Lillian Amrine, and I've emailed the lead counselor, and I've also emailed my legislators in piggybacking with the Core 24 or the Credit 24 and the assessments. Since this session is going to be so key and pivotal, what can we do as industry, as school counselors, to come alongside and be a voice, tell stories, to hopefully make some flexibility happen this January?
Great. I'm going to give you traditional channels, which you are familiar with. It's direct relationships with legislators in your community. Your industry should have a philosophy about credit equivalency, multiple pathways, flexing up testing. You all in your particular industry should have a belief about that, if not on paper, certainly something you can articulate. We have a good relationship that we're building and improving with AWB. Many of you are associated with the Association of Washington Businesses, and I think they've just done a remarkable job helping the business community statewide refocus on the goal, which is successful pathways for kids, not the presumption of this university or baccalaureate pathway for all. They're a really powerful voice, so to the extent that you all are part of that network at all, I'd say keep pushing. And I want to clarify one thing in your comment, because I think it's really, really important. We don't have Core 24, and I want to be really clear about that because people criticize me about that. We don't tell every student exactly what class they're going to take every year from freshman year to senior year. But because we have a 24-credit diploma, and for those of you doing the math, if you're in a traditional 6-period day like most high schools, it means the student has to be sort of perfect on every semester class, that same class twice in a year, 6 periods a day, 4 years, that's 24 credits. We actually have 17-ish core credits and then these flexible credits that can be in arts or career and tech ed and all that. And the reason I don't talk about that a lot is it's not the practical way it's deployed. When you tell students that everyone needs to get to a university, you effectively back into Core 24 because you really need 4 years of science, 4 years of math, 4 years of English language arts, 2 years of world language. Students jettison lots of those career pathway opportunities because they're counseled, to your point earlier, into like, what default path do I know works? Well, the university admissions path works. And so we have Core 24 by default because we don't have a lot of creativity or risk-taking on really what it is, which is 17 core credits and 7 credits that are very flexible for students. And the vision that I set out a year and a half ago is to actually move the legislature eventually to 12 core credits freshman and sophomore year, and have an entire 12 credits your entire senior year that you customize around your career pathway. And with the proper equivalencies, you'll still get math and English and science and all of that, but it will be highly tailored to where you're going. So there's substance and there's process. Got to pound on policymakers. The associations have to be all in. Your education institutions have to be in. And to the extent that you have direct voice, man, there is no more power than a legislator getting 50 not form emails. I was there, those hit a different file. 50 individual emails that say, you got to flex up this high school diploma, my industry's dying, I need young people, and you're in the way. It moves people. Yeah, so the question, if you didn't hear it, is counselors are sort of getting their gold stars and kudos based on a traditional model of how many students are graduating headed to college. Is there a way for our organization and us together to rethink sort of what it means to be successful as a counselor using different metrics? How would we honor and reward counselors who are guiding students into these other pathways? In this state, we don't have an individual performance eval on counselors based on grad rates, but to your point, the default is what we are looking at is grad rates and test scores. We've been obsessed with this for 20 plus years. I'm actually big on the graduation piece and de-emphasizing the test scores for all the reasons we just explained. If you're managing to an academic test, you force and drive kids informally into academic pathways. So by sort of ultimately getting that test so it's not linked to graduation, flexing up the junior and senior year, continuing to keep pressure on high schools because they are measured by graduation rates, but making sure that graduation means a successful pathway to an apprenticeship or military service, for example, or even direct to work. Honoring all of those graduations, that will cause more and more of our counselors and more of our professionals in the system over time to say, this isn't about getting them over an academic test hurdle and into a university. This is about developing individual plans to graduation. And as you build that system out, the world is our oyster. Then you're sitting down with kids who say, I think what I really want to do is be an electrician because I worked with my uncle the other day and I had no idea how much money he made, and how do I figure this out? And then suddenly we're going, well, let's build that pathway for you. And the good news is with equivalencies and an amazing community and technical college system, if the student pursues that their junior, senior year and gets their math and their science and the English language arts and then says, never mind, I grabbed 220 and I haven't felt my face since last week. I'm never doing this again. Great, you have your math and your science and your English language arts. Let's get you to a community or technical college, figure out another pathway. 20 years ago, we would have said to that student, oh my God, you just burned up a lot of high school credits. And they don't go anywhere. So you kind of have to start over. That's what I mean by an integrated system. When it's done well, there's nothing that stops a student from being able to change direction. And so that's going to be part of the gold star system of the future. Yes?
Hey, Chris, thank you again for joining us this morning. You know, as comprehensive high schools begin really doing some really great work and ramping up the CTE offerings that they have, could you talk a little bit about your vision for the network of skill centers around the state? And what does that look like vis-a-vis this ramped up CTE program in a comprehensive high school?
Very great question about skill centers. We have these regional, well, I'll call them networks, because the truth is all the area superintendents in that region actually form the board for those skill centers. Now, culturally, I have two observations, and maybe you'll run me out of the room after this, but culturally, I'll tell you that I believe in some part there was a very sincere want for these regional centers because we want kids to have opportunity. Cynically, I know that in some ways those were created because high schools were tearing down comprehensive CTE programs. Sometimes by cost, sometimes because, again, they bought into this model that those things weren't needed in the future. So we were saying, well, let's de-leverage our investment in assets in our comprehensive high schools and CT, and let's have regional models because very few kids will need them, and so we'll kind of house them together, and we'll all bus them there, and we'll be the board of directors. And some of them are amazing and really flourishing. They all have totally committed people. They have good programs. But because the board of directors in every area are these area superintendents, there are very perverse incentives in some places. Why would I send my $10,000 per kid into their backpack and send them off to the regional skills center when I should be fighting to keep that kid here? But I tore down my shop classes and my classes that lead to industry 20 years ago. So if I don't want to send the student in the basic ed dollars to the regional skills center, but I don't really have something to offer them, gosh, what could I offer them? Welcome to French Lit. Welcome to Algebra 2, factoring quadratic equations, because let's face it, the one pathway I know does work is a university admissions pathway. So there's nothing sinister about this. No one was out to do this, but because of some budget shortfalls, because of a really bad perception of globalization we had 20 or 30 years ago and the presumption we wouldn't need these trades, we backed into an education system that really did not create an incentive to work the skill centers the way I think they should work. So I believe we should be investing in them very aggressively, both operating and capital. I have said, and we have put forward a pilot notion to the legislature that says we think students in their junior and senior year should be able to pick a skill center as their high school of first choice. Yep. Not a halftime program. Not a halftime program where I bus there, because that works great if I'm within 10 miles. I hardly lose any class instruction time or any periods. But if I'm busing to a skill center in my region, 30 minutes or 45 minutes of each way, I'm burning up 2 class periods just to go to a halftime skills center. So what do? Then I take online courses, and maybe they're good and maybe they're not, and I'm struggling to cobble it together. If I know I can go to my area skills center and be there full-time my junior and senior year and get my academic courses, whether they're equivalent courses or standalone social studies, U.S. history, whatever, I am down for that. I want a decade from now, everyone in the region, when they get to high school, to say, I have options. I've got options of the high schools in my community, or I've got a regional skills center that is my high school of first choice. That is where I'm going. That's where I'm going to complete. That's where I'm getting my degree. That's where I'm going to transfer from to a college, university, apprenticeship, military, et cetera. I want to think of them as the most innovative, creative, technical high schools in the state. And they are on the cusp of doing that, but we have to resource them differently. We have to change the incentive system for our districts. And that's going to be pretty tough. I'm just candid with you, that's going to be tough. Our districts are facing really tough financial pressure. You're saying, how can that be? The legislature's added money. Trust me, we still invest 3.2% of our GDP into our public schools. The international average is 4%. The national average is 3.6%. Mississippi puts a bigger percentage of its tax dollars, its economic activity back into its public schools than the state of Washington. Now, not as a dollar, unadjusted basis. There's lower housing, lower cost of living, lower everything there. As a percentage of their total economic activity, a bigger percentage goes into their public schools than we do. So we have to change the financial incentive model, and our districts are saying it is still really tough to be this comprehensive. The reason we jettison comprehensive CTE programs is you try to bring in a GE engine and train kids on engine maintenance, A&P work for Boeing. Boeing wants it, we want it, kids want it, everyone wants it. There's no line item for that. There's hardly a line item to replace equipment that's already in our schools. So we got to keep pushing. I got to be that greedy bastard superintendent who tells the legislature, you're not done. And they don't like that message right now. But they're not done. They're not done until every student has a pathway. And our skill centers become an enormous opportunity for us in the future. But some of them, they're going to have a hard time hanging on in the transition.
Morning.
Support your local skill center.
Good morning. I'm over here on your right side.
I'm looking.
I'm in the right side.
Good.
Over here.
It's always the people on the right.
Sorry. So I have a question because you have about 294 superintendents for the different districts, correct? And how do you get them to see your vision and start working that way? Because there is a big disconnect and gap on that. They're all, I'm from the South End, and so we have a big disconnect on, industry manufacturing. They're all about the college, even the superintendents. So when I talk to the counselors and the college teachers, or the teachers, they're not seeing that.
Yeah, this is a tough challenge for us. I actually think they're really, really amazing folks by and large, and they really are trying to make things connect. Most of them have been brought into systems that are designed based on the past, and so they look and they say, well, the assets that I have are leading every student to college admissions, and therefore that's how I'm going to build out my gold star. And let's be honest, shoving 35 kids in an algebra class is a lot cheaper than 16 kids in a high-touch, higher risk CTE course. So they're managing to the resources they have, and that's part of what's going on there. Culturally, some of them, I think, also like our counselors and some of our teachers, aren't fully aware of the industry opportunities. In other areas, there's this powerful racial dynamic that is real. Again, there are no enemies here. But if you are a parent of an African-American child and the adult whites in the system are saying, your kid's going to a skills center, tech center, that is the wrong message. It has to be that student has had a legitimate chance to explore a career, and maybe they pick the University of Washington, or maybe they pick aerospace, or maybe they pick masonry. That's their choice. But there is a lot of that history dragging on, and you have a lot of superintendents who are saying, I'm going to be the equity superintendent that makes sure that every one of my students of color gets a baccalaureate degree. And that's not an insincere place from where we've been in history, even if every student doesn't want that. And that's the challenge. That is the challenge, because we don't have a parent network yet that still believes these are truly equivalent. They think of advanced degrees, baccalaureate degree, trades, and when they keep thinking that way, they keep thinking their students are being put into a lesser pathway. So we have a parent conversation we have to keep having and keep having and keep having. And it doesn't end, which may mean we all invest a lot more resources in communications tools and PR tools to keep talking about our industries and the opportunities, which is out there. I mean, it is building. It is a good momentum. Like, it is bipartisan. I'm hearing more and more from parents. It's probably one of the two most popular things I say to them. Your kids should be able to pick the pathway of their choice, including the trades, and people go, yes. And then I say, and every one of your students by kindergarten should be learning a second language. Because what is the point of a system that is English only and Amerocentric when 95% of the rest of the world is bilingual, speaking second languages and competing globally, and we're saying do it our way or else. So we do also have to globalize our kids. Yeah. Yes. This is where I say, local control, of course, they make the decision. It can be whatever language they want. I'm not dictating it. Even though 500 million out of 800 million people in the Western Hemisphere speak Spanish, pick whatever language you want. Okay? Go for it. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Very much.
Yep.
Wonderful.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Right on. Thank you.
Give Chris a warm applause.